When President Trump accused Obama of treason live on air, every anchor hesitated, until Jasmine Crockett stepped up and calmly dismantled him, one fact at a time, with the whole nation watching. The air inside the WCTV studio in Tempe, Arizona, felt heavier than usual that Thursday night. It wasn't the weather, it wasn't the hot lights. It was what had just come out of the president's mouth. And if you ask me, Obama committed treason. The man should be tried. That was it. 8 words, and the entire political media machine locked up like a bad transmission. Anchor Leslie Tran blinked once, then twice, before quickly shifting her papers on the desk and tossing to commercial. Off camera, the control room was chaos. Producers shouting over each other, researchers typing furiously, phones ringing nonstop. Nobody was sure what they had just witnessed or how the public would react. In a small side studio, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat watching the live feed. She had been scheduled for a quick reaction segment on voting rights legislation. Nothing heavy, just talking points, a few quotes, then off to her next stop in Phoenix. But now, the entire tone of the night had changed. She slowly set down the coffee cup she hadn't touched. No makeup artist in sight, no one whispering in her earpiece. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, where the chyron still read, "Breaking. President Trump accuses Obama of treason." There was no flinch, no visible shift in her expression. She didn't look surprised. She looked ready. Jasmine's phone buzzed. Then again. Her chief of staff, Elijah, poked his head in. "They want you in 5. You sure you want to address that?" Jasmine looked up at him, calm, focused. "I don't think I have a choice. He lit the match." She stood up, adjusted her jacket, and walked past him without another word. The hallway to the main set was short, but it felt like walking into the mouth of a furnace. People whispered. One intern accidentally dropped a pen when she walked by. She didn't stop. On set, Leslie Tran was still recovering. She offered a tight smile when Jasmine took her seat. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, mic clipped and live in less than a heartbeat. "You heard the president just now. Your thoughts?" Silence. 1 beat. 2. Then Jasmine leaned in slightly and said, with a quiet firmness that sliced through the noise, "Words have consequences, Leslie, especially when they come from the most powerful office in the country." A pause. "And accusing a former president, one who served with honor and who handed over power peacefully, of treason? That's not just reckless. That's dangerous." The cameras caught it all, her eyes, her tone, the absolute absence of panic. While commentators scrambled and former generals texted reporters to clarify what treason actually meant, Crockett sat anchored like a stone in a storm. She continued, hands clasped, voice measured. "Let's be clear. Treason is defined in the Constitution. It's not a word you throw around like a football when you're having a bad news week. There's no evidence, no trial, no cause, just a man who needs a new distraction." Leslie tried to interrupt. "But he says..." Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "He says a lot of things, but facts don't bend to fit his story. They're stubborn like that." Behind the cameras, the crew was frozen. Normally, this would be the time the anchor shifts gears, throws in a light-hearted joke to soften the blow. But Leslie didn't dare cut her off. Jasmine went on. "My father served 2 tours. He taught me what patriotism means. It's not a slogan on a red hat. It's not showing up for the cameras. It's standing for something real, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient." Leslie leaned forward, whispering slightly, "You're saying the president lied?" Jasmine turned her head just slightly, staring directly into the camera now. "I'm saying the president knows better. And if he doesn't, then we've got bigger problems than who said what on TV." The silence afterward was loud. The control room fed in texts from viewers, already reacting before the segment was over. The board lit up like it hadn't in months, but no one expected what Jasmine Crockett was about to do next. The moment the red light on the camera went off, the studio exhaled, but Jasmine didn't. She removed the mic clip herself, stood up, and calmly walked off set without waiting for direction. Her team caught up to her halfway down the corridor. Elijah, out of breath, tapped his phone screen and showed her Twitter. "You're trending, already. 200,000 mentions and counting." Jasmine didn't even look at the phone. "What's the headline?" He read aloud, "Crockett shreds Trump over treason accusation." She nodded once and kept walking. Downstairs in the lobby, journalists were already beginning to gather. A few by the elevator, some outside. One shouted a question through the glass as she passed. Are you accusing the president of inciting violence again? Jasmine didn't stop walking, but she answered loud enough for him to hear. I'm accusing him of playing with matches in a room full of gas. Back in the SUV, the team sat in silence for a moment. Jasmine's phone buzzed again. This time, it was her friend Carla from law school, now a prosecutor in Ohio. Carla's message, "Girl, you just ended a man's whole evening on live TV. You good?" Jasmine smiled, barely, then finally looked at Elijah. I need to do a follow-up tonight. We're not letting that man set the story. Elijah looked nervous. You sure? That was a lot. Might be good to pause. But she shook her head. This isn't just about Trump. It's about every kid watching tonight who's going to ask if Obama really did something wrong. I'm not leaving that question open. He sighed and started making calls. An hour later, Jasmine sat down for another live segment, this time with local anchor Chris Renault, known for his blunt, sometimes reckless style. The producers wanted balance, which meant Jasmine was now being paired with former White House aide Roland Wexler, a man who built his whole career defending Trump's worst instincts. Before the segment started, Roland leaned over and whispered, "Bold move tonight, Congresswoman. Dangerous game to play on live TV." She didn't respond. She just smiled like someone who knew the next move and the one after that. Chris opened the segment with fire. We're back, still buzzing from President Trump's explosive accusation and Congresswoman Crockett's direct response. We're joined by Roland Wexler and the Congresswoman again. Let's jump right in. He turned to Roland. Roland, your boss accused a former president of treason. Should the public take that seriously? Roland chuckled like it was a joke. Look, Chris, when the president says something, you have to look at the spirit of the comment. Jasmine cut in, politely but firmly. The spirit? Treason is the only crime explicitly defined in the Constitution. This isn't abstract. It's not poetic. It's legal. Chris raised an eyebrow. And do you believe there was any merit to what the president said? She looked directly at him. No, zero. And frankly, I don't think he believes it either. It's a distraction. He does this every time something real is about to hit. Chris leaned back. Are you suggesting something is about to hit? She hesitated just for a second, not because she wasn't sure, but because she knew how this game worked. I'm saying it's not coincidence that this treason line came hours after the DOJ announced it was expanding its investigation into classified documents found in Mar-a-Lago. The timing isn't subtle. Roland raised his hands like he'd just been accused of robbery. Whoa, there's no evidence of wrongdoing at Mar-a-Lago. Jasmine interrupted again, still calm. There's plenty. You just don't want to talk about it. Chris held up a finger. Let's bring it back. Congresswoman, are you worried about backlash from your comments tonight? She answered without blinking. If there's backlash for telling the truth, then I must be doing something right. The line hit hard. Even Chris leaned back, impressed. The feed cut to commercial, and in that brief moment off air, Roland leaned in again. You know they're going to come after you now. Jasmine looked him in the eye. Let them. But this was more than just a political clash. It hit something personal. Jasmine didn't speak much on the ride back to the hotel. The team knew better than to press her when her mind was working like that, running 2 conversations ahead, weighing every angle, every ripple. She sat with one arm resting on the door, watching the Tempe streetlights blur past. But in her head, she wasn't in Arizona anymore. She was back in the small living room of her grandfather's house in Oak Cliff, Dallas. Plastic-covered couch, wood panel walls, the faint smell of tobacco and ivory soap. That's where she first heard the word treason. She couldn't have been more than 9. Her grandfather, retired Army, had a deep voice that always made things sound heavier than they were. One night, he pointed at the television during some news clip about espionage and said, "That right there is treason. Selling out your country. Ain't nothing more dangerous than a man who plays patriot and stabs the Constitution in the back." She remembered asking, "What happens to someone who does that?" He didn't blink, just said, "They pay one way or another." It stuck with her, not as fear, but as clarity. That some lines aren't political, they're just sacred. Now, decades later, sitting in the back of a car in a city far from home, that same word had come out of the mouth of the President of the United States, used not to describe a spy or a traitor, but to smear Barack Obama. She opened her phone. Dozens of unread messages. Her public inbox was flooding with opinions, rants, and support. But one message caught her eye. Not because of the name, but because of the photo. It was a screenshot from a local history teacher in Kansas City. A black girl, maybe 12, standing in front of a whiteboard with Jasmine's face projected behind her. The teacher's caption read, "We watched your segment this morning. My students wanted to know why it takes so much courage to just tell the truth." That's when it landed, fully, the reach of her words. She turned to Elijah. "We need to release a transcript. Full thing. No edits, no spin. People deserve to hear exactly what was said." He nodded, already typing. Back in the hotel room, she kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence was thick, but not oppressive. Just enough for her thoughts to settle. The news was still playing on mute, every channel running some version of her clip. Some anchors praised her. Others warned she had gone too far. The usual script. Then her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't staff, or press, or old friends. It was her Uncle Rodney. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year, since the funeral. "Hey, baby girl," he said when she answered. His voice was older, raspier than she remembered. I wanted to say something." Jasmine sat back. "Go ahead." "I watched what you said, twice, and I just kept thinking your granddad would have been proud as hell." She smiled, looking down at the carpet. "You think?" "I know. He always said, if you ever had a mic, don't waste it trying to sound smart. Use it to tell the damn truth." They talked for 10 minutes. Nothing heavy, just memories. That's how Jasmine reset, by grounding herself in the people who knew her before the spotlight. When she hung up, she sat quietly for a few minutes, phone still in hand. Then she opened the Notes app, started typing. A list. Not of talking points, but of facts, dates, source links, quotes from legal experts, archived footage. She wasn't going to wait for the internet to twist her words. She was going to be ahead of it. At the top of the note, she wrote, "If we're going to talk about treason, let's do it with receipts." Back in the studio, the cameras were still rolling. By the next morning, Jasmine's words were everywhere. Clips of her interview played on loop across cable networks. Her quote had been chopped, recaptioned, turned into memes. Some called her bold, others reckless. But even those trying to minimize her message had no choice but to repeat it. Still, it wasn't the headlines that mattered to her. It was the faces. That afternoon, she landed in Flagstaff for a roundtable event with local high school students and educators, something her office had scheduled weeks ago. Normally, these visits were low-key. She'd talk education policy, take a few questions, snap photos, and leave. But this time, the students had already seen her. One girl near the back raised her hand halfway through. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, voice wavering a little. "How do you keep talking back to people like that without getting scared?" Jasmine paused. She looked at the girl, long braids, chipped nail polish, biting her lip while she waited. "I do get scared," Jasmine said, "but I don't let scared be the last feeling I have before I speak." There was a beat of silence. Then a few heads nodded. Someone murmured, "That's real," under their breath. Later, during a closed-door lunch with the school staff, Jasmine was pulled aside by a teacher named Ms. LaRue. She held a manila folder in her hand, tight, like it meant something. "I wanted to show you this," the woman said, opening it slowly. "One of my seniors, he's in debate club. He stayed up half the night writing a response to what you said. He printed it out because he doesn't do social media." Jasmine took the pages. The handwriting was neat. The title read, "Why Truth Still Matters." She read the first paragraph and felt the lump rise in her throat. Back in her hotel room later that evening, Jasmine found herself replaying the moment on air when everything shifted. Not the stats, not the legal definitions, those were important. But it was the exact moment she stopped answering questions and turned her focus directly to the audience. Looking down the camera, she had said, "You can't rewrite history every time it gets inconvenient. You can't scream treason just because you lost a narrative battle. And you sure can't weaponize patriotism to hide your own misconduct." At the time, she hadn't planned to say it. It wasn't in her notes. It came out of instinct. But it was the line everyone had latched onto. Her inbox was now flooded with letters from veterans, educators, former civil servants. Some long, others just a line or two. One from a retired Navy captain simply read, "You said what needed to be said. Thank you for having the guts." But the clip didn't just touch her supporters. It rattled her critics. Within hours, political strategist Maxwell Rinton went on air calling her divisive, accusing her of inciting partisan hostility. She wasn't surprised, but what did surprise her just a little was the text from an unexpected number, Mark O'Neill, a Republican congressman from Kansas, someone she'd sparred with on a committee just last year. He was blunt, traditional, and usually avoided getting involved in any firestorms, but his message was short. Don't let up. You're right. Some of us are just too scared to say it out loud. She read that message twice before setting the phone down. The silence in her room felt different now, not heavier, but sharper, like something was shifting in real time, and she was standing in the middle of it. The next morning, her staff sent her a link. Overnight, the clip of her calling out Trump had hit 7 million views, and rising. Elijah called from the lobby. You've got 3 networks asking for exclusives. You want me to shut it all down? She looked at the TV, paused on a still of her from the night before. Eyes locked, mouth mid-sentence, determined. No, she said. Let's do one. But it's going to be on my terms. But things didn't cool down when the cameras turned off. They heated up. The next 24 hours moved like a landslide. At 7:04 a.m., Jasmine's team uploaded the full, uncut transcript of her WCTV appearance to her official website. By 7:31, it had already crashed once from the flood of traffic. They moved it to a backup server and added a note at the top. These are my words. No edits. No spin. Elijah read the analytics out loud as she sipped black coffee in a small cafe just off Route 66. 2 million hits in under 90 minutes. New record. Also, a lot of trolls. She looked up, unfazed. How bad? Death threats, name-calling, you know the usual. One guy sent a photo of a noose. We're tracking IPs. Security team's on it. She stared at her coffee, then slowly pushed it aside. Get the Capitol detail on alert. If they need to tap in with Flagstaff PD, do it. Elijah nodded and stepped away to make the call. She took a breath. It wasn't fear that crept in. It was fatigue. The kind that came from knowing every word out of your mouth could get you praised by some and hunted by others. But still, she knew retreating wasn't an option. By late afternoon, the clip had hit every major network. But what caught her off guard wasn't the news. It was how people outside the political bubble were reacting. A woman approached her at the airport later that day, late 60s, white, wearing a worn denim jacket and holding a paperback mystery novel in one hand. Miss Crockett, she said gently, I don't agree with everything you said, but I raised 3 boys, and I taught middle school for 30 years. And I've never heard a politician speak with that much clarity in real time. That meant something. Jasmine didn't know what to say at first, so she just offered her hand. Thank you. The woman squeezed it, then said, Be careful, they don't like truth-tellers. That sentence echoed longer than Jasmine expected. Back in D.C., the blowback was mounting. Pundits were dissecting her every sentence like it was gospel or heresy. Campaign donors on both sides were quietly watching. And deep inside the White House, staffers were preparing a response, whether the president wanted it or not, because the numbers were getting too big to ignore. That night, back in her hotel suite, Jasmine and her staff gathered around a laptop as they watched a segment on Fox, a panel of 5. 3 men, 2 women, all clearly told to keep it balanced, but the cracks showed. One anchor leaned forward, eyes narrowed. I don't agree with Crockett's politics, but let's be honest. She handled that moment better than anyone we've seen in years. Another chimed in. Yeah, but she played with fire. She basically accused the sitting president of manipulation live on air. The third cut in, rolling his eyes. She didn't basically accuse him. She flat out called him a liar. They debated, circled around her words like a pack of analysts poking at a storm they didn't know how to forecast. Jasmine sat back. It's not about being the loudest voice, she murmured. It's about being the one people believe when everything else sounds like static. Elijah tapped on his tablet. We're getting flooded with invites, podcasts, panels. A couple universities want you to speak. You want me to triage? She shook her head. Let it ride. I'll do 1, maybe 2, but nothing rehearsed. No scripts. That night, she barely slept. Not because of the chaos, but because her mind wouldn't stop replaying the girl from Flagstaff. The quiet question, how do you speak up when you're scared? Jasmine hadn't answered the full truth then, but it weighed on her now. You don't wait to not be scared, you just speak, and hope that the people listening have enough clarity to know the difference between noise and truth. As the hotel lights dimmed and the floor went quiet, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a threat. It was a video link. A TikTok of a young woman, barely 18, repeating Jasmine's quote in front of a flag in her bedroom. You can't rewrite history every time it gets inconvenient. The caption read, She said what I couldn't find the words to say. But not everyone watching was a stranger. The next morning, Jasmine's phone rang just as she stepped out of the shower. Unknown number. She usually ignored those, but something nudged her to answer. Hello? A pause. Then a familiar voice, soft but trembling. Hey baby, it's Mama. She sat down on the edge of the bed, towel still wrapped around her. She hadn't spoken to her mother since the clip went viral, not because of tension, just time, distance, and the whirlwind pace of her schedule. Hey Mama, she said gently. You okay? I should be asking you that, her mother replied, then took a breath like she'd been holding it all night. You were on that TV saying things that most people don't even whisper at the dinner table. Jasmine leaned back against the wall. Her heart thudded a little. Not fear, just that old daughter instinct, waiting for the verdict, approval or concern. I had to say it, she replied quietly. He crossed the line, Mama, and if I didn't push back, who would? Silence on the line. Then her mother's voice, cracking just a bit. You sounded just like your granddaddy. He used to talk to the radio like they could hear him. He always said, one day someone's going to say it out loud with a mic in front of him. And you did. Jasmine closed her eyes. That old house on Elmore Street came back again. Her grandfather yelling at C-SPAN. The smell of cornbread in the oven. Those moments that raised her before she even understood they were shaping her. I don't know if it changed anything, she admitted. It did, her mom said without hesitation. It changed me. That stopped Jasmine cold. I was watching, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I felt seen. And I know I'm just one person, but baby, that's not nothing. The two sat in silence, thousands of miles apart, but feeling closer than they had in months. Her mom continued, just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't let them break you. Jasmine let the words sink in, not because she feared breaking, but because she knew how many had before her. People who stood too tall for too long without anyone to lean on. I won't, she whispered. I promise. They talked for a while longer, about nothing big, just life, groceries. Her mom's neighbor who still backed into the garbage can every Tuesday, the things that reminded her who she was underneath the headlines. After hanging up, Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, towel long forgotten, staring out the window at the hazy Flagstaff skyline. The moment felt still, until Elijah knocked. We've got a situation. She pulled on a jacket and opened the door. He held up his phone. The White House is officially responding. Jasmine followed him into the adjoining room where her comms director, Noreen, already had the feed playing. President Trump stood at a podium in front of a row of American flags, his tie unusually crooked, the press buzzing in anticipation. Then he spoke. Some angry congresswoman, who I'd never even heard of until this week, is out there talking trash like she knows something, says I'm lying to distract from the truth. I mean, who even is she? Jasmine exhaled through her nose, not from surprise, but from recognition. This was the oldest play in the book. Diminish, deflect, attack. He continued. She should be careful. People like that. Loud, angry, ungrateful. They don't last long in Washington. The room fell silent. Elijah stared at the screen. He just threatened you on national TV. Noreen was already drafting a response. Jasmine stood still, watching the screen, eyes locked on the man who, once again, used power like a blunt instrument. But this time, something was different. He wasn't rattling her. He was confirming everything she'd said. She looked over at Noreen. Let him talk. We'll do something better. Like what? Jasmine turned to her staff. We're going to make him wish he'd never asked who I was. Meanwhile, across the country, the White House wasn't staying quiet. By noon, every major outlet had clipped the president's statement and pushed it live. The words echoed across airwaves. She should be careful they don't last long in Washington. That wasn't just political theater. It was a warning dressed in a smirk. Inside Jasmine's makeshift office, a converted conference room in a small downtown Flagstaff hotel, Elijah paced while Noreen organized a row of folders stacked with prepared responses, press contacts, and media strategies. But Jasmine sat calmly in the center of it all, scanning the transcript of Trump's press conference like she was reviewing an old legal case. It's personal now, Noreen said, still typing. He didn't just go after your argument, he went after your existence. He always does, Jasmine replied, flipping a page. That's his playbook. Make it about the person, not the point. But the attacks weren't limited to press conferences. A coordinated smear campaign had already begun online. Troll accounts pushed out edited clips of her interview, slicing out context and framing her response as anti-American. Bots flooded her public posts with racist remarks and violent emojis. Hashtags like #CrockettUnhinged started trending by early afternoon. Then came the real heat. An anonymous blog, often used as a mouthpiece for right-wing political operatives, published a so-called profile of Jasmine. It included an out-of-context quote from a college interview and implied that she had once supported radical black separatists. The entire piece was filled with vague claims and no sources, but it was enough to get shared. Even mainstream journalists began calling to verify. "You want to respond?" Elijah asked. Jasmine stared at the article. Her hand was steady. Her voice didn't rise. "No," she said. "That's exactly what they want. Me playing defense. We go offense." She grabbed her phone and opened her Twitter app, typed out, "The president knows my name now. That's the problem with telling the truth. You become a threat to the lie. I'm not scared, I'm focused." She hit send. The tweet went viral within minutes, over 1 million impressions in less than an hour, and the replies, overwhelmingly supportive. Teachers, veterans, young people, former government officials, even a few surprising allies. One tweet stood out. "I didn't vote for Jasmine Crockett. I probably won't agree with her on most things, but today she spoke for me." It came from a user with a flag in their profile and a location tagged in rural South Dakota. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "That one hit different." Jasmine nodded. "Truth has range." But the attacks kept coming. Late that night, her team discovered a forged photo being circulated on social media, a doctored image of Jasmine photoshopped into a protest she'd never attended, wearing clothes she'd never worn. It took her team less than 15 minutes to track the original and call it out, but the damage was already rippling. "That's how they fight," Noreen said bitterly. "Lie first, clean up never." Jasmine stood by the window, arms crossed, the city below dimming under the late-night sky. "Doesn't matter," she said. "We're not playing their game. I'm not going to scream louder. I'm going to speak clearer." Elijah checked his tablet. 2 more news networks want interviews, back-to-back live slots. "Not live," she said, turning away from the window. "They'll cut me off. I want recorded, in full, no edits." Noreen looked up. "Which one?" Jasmine thought for a second, then gave a small smile. "Give it to Channel 5 in Toledo." "Toledo?" Elijah asked. "Why?" "Because they asked respectfully," Jasmine replied, "and because they're not looking to catch a soundbite. They want a conversation." Later that evening, before the interview, she sat alone for a moment, not thinking about the noise, the hate, or the headlines, but about the point. She'd said what needed to be said. She had more to say. And if the president wanted a war of words, he picked the wrong opponent. Because while he was firing from the gut, she was speaking from the record, from the truth, from every legal file and policy vote he hoped no one would remember, and she wasn't finished. But Jasmine had already made up her mind. The interview with Channel 5 Toledo wasn't flashy. No bright studio lights, no sharp-edged graphics, no dramatized lead-in music. Just Jasmine sitting across from veteran journalist Arlene Glass in a modest newsroom with linoleum floors and the faint buzz of old ceiling lights. But sometimes, plain is powerful. Arlene got straight to it. "Congresswoman Crockett, the president said you're angry and ungrateful, that people like you don't last long in Washington. How do you respond?" Jasmine didn't blink. "People like me? You mean people who tell the truth or black women who don't back down?" Arlene didn't interrupt. She just waited. Jasmine leaned forward, her tone calm but surgical. "I've been called angry since I was 14 years old and corrected a history teacher who said slavery ended in 1863. Being black and honest tends to offend people who are used to the truth getting softened." Arlene gave her space. "But here's what really matters," Jasmine continued. "When the President of the United States calls a former commander-in-chief a traitor with no evidence, that's not a political spat. That's propaganda. And if we don't push back on propaganda, it becomes accepted truth." The quote hit hard. Jasmine could feel it even as she said it, the kind of sentence that would outlive the segment. She'd practiced none of it. This wasn't a strategy session. This was a moment. And she kept going. "He wants chaos. That's what he's always wanted. Distract, divide, dominate. But this country has never been held together by fear. It's been held together by facts, laws, people who showed up even when they were exhausted." Arlene jumped in softly. What would you say to people, especially young people, who feel like their voices don't matter anymore? Jasmine sat back. I'd say the people in power are counting on that. They're hoping you stay home, stay quiet, stay scared, because if you ever decided to speak, to organize, to show up, it's over for them. That last sentence was clipped and replayed across the country by the following morning, not just on MSNBC or NPR, but on shows that typically steered clear of political stories altogether. It was the clarity, the rhythm, the undeniable logic delivered without theater. She didn't need to shout. She just made sense. After the interview, Arlene shook her hand and said, I've been doing this for 42 years. What you did tonight, that wasn't a soundbite. That was a record scratch. Jasmine smiled. I'm just trying to keep the volume where it belongs. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a new message. This time, it was from Councilman Deshaun Ridge in Fresno, someone she hadn't spoken to in over a year. His message, they're gonna drag you through it, but keep walking. That segment tonight, my daughter watched it with me. She asked if she could print out your quote and tape it to her bedroom mirror. She stared at the message for a long moment, then tapped back. Tell her, the mirror's a good place for truth. You see it every day. But the support wasn't limited to friends. The next morning, an unexpected source came forward. A retired federal prosecutor named Linda Marston wrote a public op-ed in the Cincinnati Register. She wasn't a politician, not a pundit, just someone who'd served under 3 administrations and once worked on intelligence clearance briefings. The title of her piece, Crockett is Right, the word treason must not be toyed with. In it, she laid out the legal framework for treason, why the president's accusation against Obama was legally and historically inaccurate, and why Crockett's response wasn't just valid, it was necessary. Jasmine read it 3 times. Who is she? Elijah asked. Jasmine just smiled. Someone who knows what she's talking about. Momentum was shifting, not radically, not all at once, but enough. Enough to get people thinking, enough to prove that when you speak plainly, back it with facts, and don't flinch when they come swinging. People notice. Some even stand up beside you. Then came the messages that changed everything. Jasmine's inbox had become a map of America. Messages poured in from everywhere. Bakersfield, Sioux Falls, Dayton, Bismarck, Mobile. Names she'd never heard. Towns she'd never visited. Stories she'd never expected. But it was one message, handwritten in neat blue ink, that stopped her cold. It arrived through the mail, not email. Folded inside an old manila envelope, addressed simply, Rep here, Jasmine Crockett, Capitol Hill Office, D.C. The letter was from Judge Wallace Gehring, retired circuit judge from Fort Smith, Arkansas. Conservative, Reagan appointed. Not the type of person who usually wrote letters to Democratic congresswomen, especially not black ones. Her eyes scanned the page slowly. Congresswoman, I've spent my life on the bench, 41 years to be exact. I've sentenced men, freed men, watched lawyers play fast and loose with facts, and watched others stand up when it cost them. What I saw in your segment wasn't theater, it was integrity. The Constitution needs defenders. You're one. Don't stop. Sincerely, Judge W. Gehring. She read it twice, then handed it to Elijah, who whispered under his breath, well, damn. But that wasn't the only surprise. 2 hours later, she got a call from an unfamiliar number. Normally, she wouldn't answer, but something made her pick up. Congresswoman Crockett? Yes. This is William Jeffers. I'm a Vietnam vet. I've voted Republican my whole life. I've never watched a full interview with a Democrat until last night. Jasmine waited, unsure where this was headed. I just wanted to say, you didn't yell. You didn't make excuses. You told the truth. And you didn't back down when the president tried to bully you. She blinked. I appreciate that, truly. He wasn't done. I got 3 grandkids. I want them to see that kind of courage on TV more often, not just from your side, from any side. When they hung up, she sat quiet for a while, not because she was overwhelmed, but because it meant something when people who didn't owe her anything stood up anyway. Later that afternoon, a clip surfaced of Congressman Emmett Voss, Republican, Ohio, speaking to a group of veterans in Columbus. The event wasn't meant to make headlines. It was supposed to be a quiet town hall. But someone in the crowd asked about Jasmine Crockett's comments. To everyone's surprise, Voss didn't dodge. I don't agree with her politics, he said, arms crossed, but I watched what she said. And she didn't lie. In fact, she did what a lot of folks in my own party were too afraid to do, call out nonsense for what it is. Someone in the back of the crowd clapped, then another, then more. The clip got picked up and passed around. Evening talk shows started framing it as a rare bipartisan moment. But Jasmine didn't care about the coverage. She cared about the signal it sent. The wall was cracking. People weren't just listening, they were questioning. And not because she told them what to think, because she made it okay to think out loud again. That night, she finally allowed herself a small moment of stillness. Just her, alone in the hotel room, feet up on the windowsill, scrolling through messages until she found one that made her stop. It was a photo. A young girl in Nebraska standing in front of her bedroom mirror. Taped to it was Jasmine's quote in marker on a scrap of paper. "You can't rewrite history every time it gets inconvenient." Below it, the girl had written, "I want to say the truth when I'm scared too." Jasmine didn't cry. She didn't say anything. She just took a screenshot and saved it under a folder she kept for moments like this. She labeled the folder Proof. Proof that standing tall doesn't always mean standing alone. But none of that would matter without what happened next. 1 week later, Jasmine walked into the auditorium of Western State University in Spokane, Washington, where she'd been invited to give the closing speech at a national forum on democratic integrity. She wasn't the keynote, wasn't even on the original lineup. But after her viral moment, a slot opened, and no one else was better suited to close. The room was packed, students, professors, press, veterans sitting in the back, cameras mounted discreetly but ready. You could feel the stillness before she spoke. She didn't open with a joke, or a greeting, or even a quote. She opened with a memory. When I was 9, my grandfather told me what treason meant, not the textbook version, but the moral one. He said treason isn't just betraying your country, it's betraying the people who believe in it. No slides, no props, just her voice and that bone-deep steadiness she carried like armor. And a week ago, she continued, the President of the United States accused a former president, one who carried himself with honor and restraint, of committing treason, with no evidence, no charge, just impulse. She looked around the room, let the silence stretch. But it's not about Donald Trump. Not really. It's about the moment we're living in, where truth bends, where power flexes, and where the loudest lie can outshout the quiet truth if we let it. A student in the front row sat motionless, eyes locked on her. Jasmine's tone shifted, more intimate, like she was talking one-on-one. I've been called angry, bitter, arrogant, emotional. I've been told to smile more, speak less, be softer. But I learned early that truth doesn't need to be soft to be right. She let that settle, then continued. This moment we're in, it isn't new. Every generation gets tested, and our test is whether we will allow power to twist language until the lie becomes the new common sense. Her voice grew stronger. When someone lies on live TV, calls it truth, and dares the world to blink first, that's not just a problem for politicians to solve. That's your problem. That's our responsibility. In the wings, Elijah watched, arms folded, pride quiet in his stance. And when I spoke last week, I didn't do it for attention. I did it because silence was no longer neutral, because too many of us learned that lesson too late. And the cost of pretending you didn't hear the lie is that eventually you start to believe it. The crowd leaned in. No coughing, no fidgeting, just listening. Speaking truth doesn't mean you'll be applauded. It means you'll be targeted, laughed at, misquoted. But if you don't do it, if we don't do it, then we let someone else rewrite what's real. She took a small breath and softened her tone. My grandfather didn't get to see me in Congress. He passed the year before I ran. But he did tell me something I never forgot. If you ever get a mic, don't waste it pretending to be liked. Use it to make someone remember. A single clap started in the back, then another, then more. By the end, the room was on its feet. Jasmine didn't linger. She stepped off the stage, took a quick nod from the organizer, and slipped into the hallway before the applause even faded. She hated making moments about herself. Outside, the air was cooler, crisp. She stood alone under a patch of fading sky and let it wash over her. Not as a politician, not as a name trending online, just as someone who told the truth and was still standing. Elijah caught up to her with a soft grin. You know you could have run for president tonight, right? She rolled her eyes. Let's survive this week first. He nodded. They're going to remember this one. I hope they remember the why, she said quietly. They stood there a moment longer. No need to fill the silence. The kind of peace that only comes when you've done exactly what you were meant to do and accepted whatever comes after. Jasmine checked her phone one last time before heading to the car. One new message. A video. Same girl from Nebraska. This time she was reading Jasmine's speech out loud in her room, her voice clear and steady. No makeup, no filters, just truth being passed forward. Jasmine smiled, saved the video, and whispered to herself, "Good. If you believe truth still matters, if you believe facts shouldn't be optional and courage is worth something, don't be silent. Share this story. Speak up when it's hard. Because if enough of us do, no one can rewrite what's real."